Hey, welcome back to the Basics to Wellness channel. Thanks for joining me again this evening. I'm Paul Stumpo, the host of this channel, and I want to point out a little administrative on the videos that I'm going to post. The first part of the name will be a category, so you'll see health and wellness followed by a title. And so in keeping with that, this one's going to be a little different than the health and wellness. This is more like philosophy and social order, as I share some thoughts that have been provoked by some of my own experiences in listening to language and culture and watching what is currently going on in the United States. And this video is partly inspired by what I see going on in the African American community. Remember that term because I'm going to come back to it to describe how there's been a transition in thought processing around things that we've called politically correct terms. And so as a part of what's going on in the African American community, and when I see what's going on with Candace Owens and her impulse into that community, has kind of inspired this video to come forward, and hopefully I can be a part of that discussion. Well, I am a part of that discussion, and I'll tell you how. It was 20 years ago on the air on a small radio station, minority-owned, African-American-owned radio station in Detroit, where I made a statement that when the African-American community and would come to or release themselves from the chains of darkness that have held them, the slavery mentality that was still holding them at that time, for good reason. There was lots of impulse for that to exist. So once they really came to themselves to stand in the authority and capability and spiritual power that resides within that community that I see and recognize, then they would bring salvation to this country. In fact, I went even further to say that the only way we would skirt the darkness that's trying to destroy this nation is when the African American community would come to themselves and stand in their rightful place and who they are as these powerful spiritual beings and help create a way out of the darkness that's pervading in the United States. And so part of this discussion is with the whole concept of our languaging. When you say, what does language have to do with it? Well, language is what creates. It's the power in the tongue that creates. And so life and death comes out of the tongue. And so what I hear currently in the African American community is, like, say, for Candace Owens, if you happen to be watching, you call yourself black. And I think I can understand where that comes from. You know, when this term first came on the scene, African American, I grew up in the city of Detroit and went to probably a 90-95% African American based school, so I was a minority there and spent 4 years there or 3 years there as a minority and got an appreciation what it's like to be in a minority or in that context. And when this term first came on the scene, I wholeheartedly rejected it. You know, as politically correct, someone trying to control my languaging, and threw it to the side and said, no, the term I'm using is black. That's who they are. Well, as I grew in my consciousness and began to ask more questions, like, for instance, what does it mean to call oneself black? If I were to jump forward to today, when somebody comes into my office and they're looking for some coaching around their well-being, the thing that I look to and listen the most is how are they languaging their current condition, you know, and how are they languaging their emotional states. And, you know, for instance, people say, I am angry, or I am afraid, or I am in a whole bunch of things to fill in the blank there to describe the essential quality of their being. And not recognizing that we make this statement, I am, that we are talking about our core essence. You know, if you study scripture as I do, and you understand that Yahweh, the definition of Yahweh is I am that I am. And one of the things that was a big issue when Christ came on the scene is that he called himself I am. He constantly referred to himself as I am. And in today's age, in the Western world, we have a particular way of talking about ourselves, as in I am hungry. Now, let's see if that makes any sense. I am hungry. So the core definition of my being is hunger. No, it actually does not make any sense. And this is where I kind of start with trying to help someone focus on and transform the languaging, because it is so important. And the creative power is in our words. And if our words are confused or not accurate or not truth, right? Because it's certainly not truth to say I am white. I, first of all, am not white. If you held up something that was white next to my face, you would see that my pigment color of my skin tone is not white. Or for someone that says I'm black, if you held up something that was black, of course we know white and black are shades and not colors, but that's beside the point. So Candace, if you were to hold up something that was black to your face or to your skin, you would notice that your skin tone is not black. And saying I am black or I am white or I am hungry, again, we're making a statement about the essence of our being. So how I begin to help them transform this concept is that, like in Italian, you would say io ho fame. I have hunger. And now, instead of having my experience define who I am, I'm actually owning my experience as something I'm experiencing, or I have that in my experience. And so if you look at it in the emotional state, just as an aside, when somebody is having a difficult time with what's going on with themselves, and they may not, and typically don't, want to admit that they have shame or they have guilt or they have fear or they have anger, because they say it like this, I am angry. And so no one wants to be defined as anger, and therefore there would be a natural inclination to deny such. But if we shift it and they say, I have anger, oh, well, that's a truth. That's a true statement. I'm experiencing anger right now. Wow, I can relate to that. And so what I say to you, Candace, or anybody else that's listening, because I kind of want to allow for or inspire a continual impulse into the African American community to transform who they say that they are. So actually, the title of this particular video is Who Do I Say That I Am? And I am a spiritual being, an eternal spiritual being that is in this physical body. It has somewhat of an Italian heritage. We've got a variety, as most people do, in their DNA. And so who I am is this spiritual being having this experience in this body, in this being, in this mental emotional being, in spiritual awareness. And so my spirit has this set of emotions and this set of mental capabilities in this physical form, and I have inherited all the weaknesses and strengths of it, and that's what it is. I'm having that as an experience, and it's not defining who I am. And that's the transition in consciousness, so that someone who has spent their life in poverty in the African American community, by the way, that term itself is still erroneous, right? Because if I say I'm a spiritual being, calling myself an Italian American is still inaccurate. the whole reason why I chose to go to that languaging is it's a step forward in releasing three-dimensional consciousness about who I am. Just a step forward. So to continue to step and understand that you, Candace, are a spiritual impulse into this body that you have that happens to have that skin tone, which I can tell you right now is not black. And I know and I've heard professional painters talking about how much paint colors they've had to mix to get a particular tone that they were looking for, and not realizing just to what extent they would have to mix these vast amounts of colors together to get the exact tone that they wanted. And I would suggest that your skin tone is very much the same. I'm sure it's got some black in it, but a whole variety of other colors are there. So this is not a truism to call yourself black. So to take another step forward in relieving yourself, and I do it with myself as well, relieving myself of a three-dimensional construct that defines who I am. And so, again, this is my belief that when the African American community allows themselves to step into their authority, their spiritual authority, and capability, and it's quite substantial, that it will dramatically shift the course of this nation, and it will save this nation. Now, that's a broad stroke statement there. If you have comments on it, please leave them below. And look for my next videos. Thank you for joining me tonight.